and easily. While they were distracted, Huian stepped forward, capturing their attention. With a serious gaze, she said that if they were talking about the ice jade, then she knew someone who had it. Upon hearing this, a curious smile appeared on the faces of Soryong and Peng Muwen, since for them this was good news. With a curious gaze, Soryong approached her and asked who had the ice jade. She panicked and asked him to calm down. She began to sweat, not knowing what to say. Seeing this, Soryong and Peng Muwen became somewhat confused. Huian swallowed saliva, then began to touch her chin and with a sincere gaze revealed that they were some other weed. Upon hearing this, our boy's jaw dropped in surprise, while on the other hand, Peng Muwen became even more confused. With a serious gaze, she let out a sigh. Soryong's eyes widened in fear as he did not know what was happening. Peng Muwen and Soryong began to observe Huian, not knowing what she had in mind. Even Peng Muwen felt confused. Huian began to show a confident smile, and upon seeing this, Soryong's eyes filled with fear, and he couldn't help but sweat. He put his hand on his face and let out a sigh. He didn't know why his father-in-law had to say something like that at that moment. He remembered that in this world girls were called weed. Peng Muwen crossed his arms and asked who was that other weed who supposedly had the ice jade. Soryong came out of his thoughts and his jaw dropped in surprise, leaving him in shock. Huian began to show a confident gaze. Showing a finger, she revealed that one of the 3 flowers of Muram was known as the Flame Queen Peony. Her real name was Namgung Xiao, the daughter of the Namgung clan. From what she had heard, Xiao had the ice jade, but she really didn't need it. Upon hearing this good news, a smile appeared on Peng Muwen's face, while on the other hand, Soryong's jaw dropped in surprise. While they were conversing, the little gecko appeared and started making chirping sounds to get Soryong's attention. Upon hearing the gecko's voice, our boy became curious and turned around. The little gecko's eyes filled with tears and sadness. Huian asked what he was saying, and Soryong revealed that he was asking them to quickly treat the injured gecko. Soryong reached out his hand and decided to save the rest of the conversation until after treating the gecko. Huian nodded her head. Noticing that the little gecko was nervous, she thought that was for the best. Soryong peeked his head between the rocks and saw the little gecko sleeping. He took her out of the nest and began to examine her carefully. The other gecko's eyes began to shine with concern. With a confused look, Huian remembered that geckos could cut off their own tails. She didn't know why it had held on until things had gotten so bad. With a sad expression, Soryong admitted that she was right, but also revealed that there were some geckos that weren't like that. Upon hearing this, Huian's eyes widened in confusion. When a lizard cut off its own tail, it was called autotomy, and depending on the species, the traits were different. Soryong began to observe the gecko carefully, remembering that there were some who could perform autotomy but couldn't regenerate. Some could both shed and regrow, and others couldn't do either of those things, so he couldn't assume anything and had to examine it properly. Soryong started to touch the gecko's tail. Once they confirmed it, they would find the detachment segment and press it with a finger to trigger the separation. Huian's eyes filled with confusion since she didn't know what that was. With a smile, our boy explained that although it seemed like the gecko's tail could be cut anywhere, in reality, the point where it breaks was predetermined. That was what they called the detachment segment. Huian was in shock since she didn't know much about geckos. Because they weren't poisonous, she didn't know how Soryong knew so much. According to her, this was amazing. The gecko was sleeping in Soryong's hands. He had sounded confident when he said it, but the tail was already very decayed, so he wasn't sure that the surgery would go well. Soryong grabbed its tail and his eyes began to shine with determination. He had to try anyway since he was spicy Fabry. A few minutes later, Soryong and Huian began performing the surgery. Peng Muwen, who was sitting on a rock, realized that this was taking longer than he had thought. With a serious gaze, he started staring at Soryong, and the little gecko began to emit chirps. A few minutes later, with the gecko sleeping in his arms, Soryong appeared. Lord Peng Muwen asked what had happened to the gecko. Huian began to show a smile, while on the other side, with a joyful gaze, Soryong revealed that fortunately the surgery had gone well. As long as they took good care of her, she should be fine. Upon hearing this, the little gecko couldn't help but cry and show a grateful smile. Our boy sat next to the gecko and felt happy to see that he was so happy. Peng Muwen's gaze fixed on our boy. The more he looked at him, the more incredible he seemed. The pair of geckos returned to the nest. Now that the surgery had been completed, Soryong and the others decided to stay nearby and monitor its condition for a few days. A few days later, with a curious smile, Soryong and Huian returned to the cavern and began to run toward the rocks. Near the nest was the pair of geckos playing happily. Seeing that her condition was better, Soryong couldn't help but smile. The little geckos began to show tender looks. Soryong clenched his fists and couldn't help but feel excited, realizing that they had gone from being kittens to being lizard puppies, knowing that if this had happened in his past life, it surely would have gone viral. Soryong's attention was fixed on the female gecko, realizing that the injured girl had also regained some strength. Now that her condition was better, Soryong decided it was time to leave. Upon hearing this, the gecko's eyes widened with sadness. With a smile, Soryong explained that they were not going away forever. They were just going to get some food for them and then come back. Until then, he asked the gecko to make sure to preserve the seeds Kai. The two geckos nodded their heads. Soryong turned around and with a confident gaze told Huiyin that it was time to return to the Tang clan. With an excited gaze, he clenched his fist and thought that it was time to obtain the Ice Jade. A few hours later, they returned to the manor of the Tang clan and sat down to chat with the patriarch. Back in the Tang clan, leaving behind the geckos, a few pieces of news had arrived, and among them, without a doubt, the biggest incident had been the matter related to the blood cult. The patriarch interlaced his hands and with a serious gaze decided to speak about that matter. After the identity of a spy infiltrated in the Murim alliance was revealed, their warriors followed the owl that an assistant had raised. A man with a mustache hid behind a tree, and when he peeked out, his eyes widened in surprise and fear. The owl arrived at the hideout of the blood cult, which was filled with ninjas. Coincidentally, a squad had just returned to the Murim alliance, and they had sent them poison extracted from tiger-striped water snakes, which had played an important role when they raided the hideout. Showing a letter, the patriarch revealed that the leader of the alliance had personally sent a handwritten letter of gratitude. He was very proud of Soryong. With a forced smile, Soryong coughed. The patriarch asked if he had caught that mysterious gecko. He decided to stop by the toxic creature garden himself to see how it looked. Soryong began to sweat and with a nervous gaze mentioned that one could say they had half caught the gecko. Upon hearing this, the patriarch felt somewhat confused. Just then, with a serious expression, Huiyin decided to explain everything that had happened so far to her father. The patriarch put the cup of tea on the table. He began to stroke his beard and started thinking about the Ice Jade. Resting her hands on the table, Huiyin stood up and explained that for that reason, they had planned to go together to Anhui province to visit the Namgun clan. After thinking, with a calm gaze, the patriarch gave them permission to go. For him this was very convenient since he needed them to deliver something along the way. The timing wasn't the best because of the blood cult, but if Soryong was with her, he could be at ease. Soryong let out a sigh and his eyes filled with confusion since he didn't know if that had been a stealthy way of assigning him a task. Just before they could leave, with a serious expression, the patriarch asked them to wait a moment. He closed his eyes and revealed that some disturbing rumors had been circulating lately about the Namgun clan. Soryong and Huiyin began to look at each other and their eyes widened in surprise. It was nighttime and near the Namgun clan was Yellow Mountain. Two men were walking around the area. The bald man's eyes filled with surprise and he couldn't help but sweat when he asked if his friend was joking. With a confident gaze, his friend said that he was telling the truth. He again mentioned that the young lady from the Namgun clan was not normal. With an angry gaze, the bald man asked his friend to stop saying nonsense and not to make up dirty and scandalous rumors. His friend's attention was fixed on something. Not far from them there was a man lying on the ground. Upon seeing this, their eyes widened in fear. They began to run toward the man without knowing why someone had collapsed here. The friend placed his hand under the man's head without knowing if he was dead. Just then, the man began to smile. Their attention was fixed on the man and they could not help but feel even more confused. The man had not collapsed. Blood was coming out of his nose. He was red like a tomato and gasping heavily, as if he were in love. The men began to look at each other and felt even more confused. They carried the man on their back and decided to take him to the village thinking that he must be drunk. Not far from them, there was a woman hidden behind a tree, watching everything. The woman's body began to release a strange aura. Her shadow became larger. She was like a spider hanging from its web.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like the video. Thank you.